What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout. The Buffalo Bills' initial 53-man roster is absolutely locked in, Ryan Talbot, and we're getting locked in here just about 40 minutes before the next episode of Hard Knocks airs. It'll be interesting to see what ends up going on that show. I saw a clip from NFL Network, or NFL Films, I should say, that they put out where Chris Hess, the throwing digital mapping expert that's been working with Josh Allen the last couple of years. They got him on Hard Knocks, I think. So that's probably going to be a part of this episode. A lot to get into from a roster construction standpoint. But my big beginning takeaway here is, Ryan, this was about what we expected. I mean, there were not a lot of eyebrow raising moves. I even thought by the time we got to Tuesday, the biggest move, right? Like Tyrell Shavers making it on the 53, that almost felt like anticlimactic, because almost like, how could they keep him off the roster at this point?
Right. I will say this. I think there was a level of panic among the fan base still, even though Shavers did so much this summer from a special team standpoint, wide receiver standpoint, that they were still going to somehow maybe move on from him and have him go back to the practice squad, or try to go back to the practice squad, because I think he would have been claimed elsewhere had that scenario played out. So, I think for a lot of us covering the team, we thought that he was going to make the roster, but it was certainly something that fans are monitoring all day long.
If you're monitoring like plane deals, right? Like you're trying to trick a trip and you're monitoring the prices. Maybe it's a last minute trip and you're like, man, these flights are out of control. Get over on Amtrak.com right now and let them hook you up with an unbelievable travel package. It's super affordable. They offer frequent departures daily from Niagara Falls, Buffalo, all the way to New York City. Stops include Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Schenectady, Albany, Hudson, Poughkeepsie, Rhinecliff, and more. No middle seats, plenty of legroom, reclining seats, free Wi-Fi, no baggage fees, and kids ride 50% off. Riding Amtrak is an experience, a fun and relaxing way to get to your destination. All right, so Tyrell Shavers is on the roster, and let's take a look at this wide receiver room in general and maybe set expectations, because here's the most challenging part for me if I'm sitting in Brandon and Sean's seats or in the room with them, helping them make this decision. I get why you keep Tyrell Shavers. I would have probably even advocated for it. The challenge on the other side of it is, how does he get a game day jersey now? Even despite the growth that he's shown in special teams, I think that there's probably, I don't think there's going to be many games where they go in with 6 wide receivers active. So what does that potentially mean? Maybe Elijah Moore doesn't have a jersey. Maybe Curtis Samuel doesn't have a jersey. That's a lot of money to have somebody as a game day inactive. So what do you think this looks like on the other side? And things could change a little bit if maybe Khalil Shakir needs another week or two and won't be ready by week 1. We'll track that and see where it's at. But this collection of talent in the wide receiver is very interesting. It's a departure from the last couple of years of how they've handled this position.
Yeah, 100%. And there's going to be probably an odd man out every week. It might be based on matchups. It might be based on how teams are their weaknesses, I guess, for opposing teams. Are they hurt by speedy receivers? Are they hurt by guys that can, play multiple positions? Does the special teams play factor into it? If so, that leans in Shavers' favor. There's going to be layers to this week by week in terms of what the Bills ultimately decide in terms of the odd man out. But I agree. I think most weeks it's going to be a Shavers or Elijah Moore situation. But the good part of that is it's good to have 6 guys, considering how banged up they were at the position throughout the summer. If it was like that during the summer, they're going to need to call on these guys sooner rather than later. And there might just be some weeks where you're going to need that extra man to be active and given a game day jersey.
I'm not surprised. Like, I know there was a lot of noise around a potential Samuel trade. Maybe the Bills didn't see enough from an Elijah Moore. I always felt like the trade was probably the more likely outcome. I felt pretty strongly that Elijah Moore was going to be on this 53-man roster because of the versatility. I think he could do multiple things. Like if you have a Josh Palmer that's injured for any stretch of time, Khalil Shakir, who's been out for most of the summer, you could slot Moore into a lot of different roles. He can be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in that way. I also think that Tyrell Shavers can do that. So I think it's going to almost be, you take everything that you've learned about these players over the 6-7 weeks of training camp and preseason. You project it to the regular season, but the competition continues. I mean, these guys are going to be fighting it out in practice every single week to figure out who fits into what role best. But when they do actually play the Baltimore Ravens, if Khalil Shakir is healthy, I expect to see mostly Keon Coleman, Josh Palmer, and Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, and rightfully so. Those are your top three. They're going to get the bulk of the reps. And then, in that scenario, that might work in Shavers' favor because of the special teams aspect. You can trust him in that phase of the game. So he gets a game day jersey, might get to run a few reps at receiver. But week by week, health, those are the things that are going to factor into these decisions.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. We really appreciate that. And we've been talking about a bunch of different players here. Obviously, a couple wide receivers that were cut. KJ Hamler was somebody that I, had developed a little bit of a connection with Bills fans over the last couple of seasons. Was obviously a popular player on Hard Knocks. Laviska Shenault, who they brought in to kind of contribute on special teams, didn't really work for him, and both of those guys end up getting cut. So what do you think in terms of what the Bills do on the practice squad? Do you think that they go and try to bring back both of those guys? Do you think that they're both in play to come back? Or do you think like a guy like Hamler, there might be a little bit of a market out there if a team is looking to maybe improve their wide receiver room?
No, I think Hamler is a safe bet to come back into the fold. Shenault, we'll see. I didn't necessarily see a ton from him this summer. Part of it was he was injured for a chunk of it. You only get 6, though, vested veterans of the 16 practice squad spots. And then you have the one extra spot, obviously, for the international pathway player. So the Bills have to be smart about who they bring into those roles, knowing that, Jordan Phillips is going to take one of those spots. He's a vested veteran. There's a few other guys that they've probably talked to about taking on roles of that caliber. So that could also play into why you only keep maybe one receiver that would be listed as a veteran over 2 in that scenario.
I want to shift gears a little bit here to cornerback because the Bills move on from Dane Jackson. I think him getting back in the mix on the practice squad makes a ton of sense. I think the big question, though, now is it's not surprising. But both of us felt like going into this that Dane Jackson, there was a really strong chance that he didn't do enough this summer to make the team. So now with him out of the mix, you think about Maxwell Hairston going on IR, which is also something that was expected. He'll be out for at least the first 4 weeks. And then you look at some of the options that the Bills have opposite Christian Benford. It's not a super long list, right? Like Tre'Davious White, we still don't know the severity of that injury. Then you're talking about a Jamarcus Ingram, rookie Dorian Strong, and obviously, in a way, to move on from Jackson, that's a bit of a vote of confidence, I think, for Dorian Strong and how he kind of came on late in the summer from my vantage point. Do you expect Dane Jackson to be back? And if so, do you expect the Bills to do anything else at the position?
Great question. I do think Dane will be part of the practice squad. He'll be one of the veterans that take a spot. It just makes too much sense despite the disappointing summer. It's the knowledge of the scheme, the youth on this roster to have someone to lean on in that regard. So I think he does take it. In terms of what's out there, we'll see. Maybe that would be the position where you think the Bills could make a claim. But the problem is no one that you make a claim on is going to be ready for week 1 in terms of comfort in the system, knowledge of the system. So even if you go that route, you're a few weeks away from them maybe even stepping into a role and contributing. So it's tough. Looking at this roster, I think Jamarcus Ingram makes the most sense to start opposite Christian Benford in week 1. I know, the options aren't necessarily appealing if you're a Bills fan looking at this roster list, but you don't want to put Dorian Strong out there week 1 against Lamar Jackson and a very, very good and physical Ravens team. I think Ingram's knowledge is going to give him the hand there. There was a Ravens cornerback that was released today that'd be an intriguing player, Jalen Armour-Davis, who health issues. He's missed a lot of time in his career due to some injuries, but I believe he was a 4th-round pick in 2022. a high pedigree type of player, someone that actually flashed a lot this summer, just didn't make the cut with some of the younger players that the Ravens all opted for.
I think Rasul Douglas going and finally ending his long summer waiting for an opportunity and signing with the Miami Dolphins tells you the level of interest the Bills probably had on the veteran free agent market at the position. I think in a lot of ways, Ingram, Jackson, and White all kind of check those boxes. And to get somebody up to speed on your defense, that's a point that you made that really, to me, isn't, I think, appreciated enough amongst the fan base. And I do think that it's worth I don't want to say criticizing, but at least questioning their reluctance to bring in veteran players at that position specifically. It feels like they like to go back to the well at cornerback. Rasul was actually a departure from that a bit. Like before him, I'm trying to think the last veteran free agent or acquisition that they went to that wasn't a part of their build. It's probably, was it Kevin Johnson?
That's the name that just stuck in my mind, but I was wondering if we were missing someone in between. The one thing I'll say about Kevin Johnson, though, is he had the relationship with John Butler, so he did have some knowledge of what, or maybe at least John Butler's terminology. Maybe it wasn't the same system. So even in that area, it was someone that the Bills had, coaching staff had some familiarity with. And Scott in the comments, no, Levi Wallace is not coming back. He was in Buffalo to go to a restaurant/arcade that is going out of business, or not. They're leaving, I should say, in the next week or two.
Nothing against Levi Wallace. Nice guy. That is not a chapter I think the Bills need to reread at this point. And I don't know, sometimes I think some things happen that almost force your way to a breakup, right? Like the 13 seconds debacle. I don't know how you ever bring that back into the mix. And the Bills have done so much about getting guys back in. I mean, listen, a couple days ago, we just talked about Jordan Phillips getting back in the fold, right? The Bills tend to lean on guys that they know. I'm completely out on the Levi Wallace idea if it even kind of pops up at any point this season or beyond.
No, it would be good if the Bills did look elsewhere in terms of a claim or adding a few outside players to the practice squad at the position. Try to develop players, bring them up in the system that way, and integrate players of that younger caliber, not someone that necessarily is a retread where there's an advantage of knowing the system, but they do have to get a little bit younger there. They do have to try to coach some new players up in case injuries like this ever were to pop up again.
All right, next up, we're getting to our big 5 takeaways, and I want to go to the linebacker position because the Bills go with what I think was the expected. I looked at a lot of 53-man projections across the beat, and I think a lot of people went with the 5 that were kept: Milano, Bernard, Dorian Williams, Joe Andreessen, and Shaq Thompson. The Bills move on from Edifon Ulofoshio in his second season. He was a 5th-round draft pick last year. It's just felt like at every stage for him, he just seems like he's behind a little bit, right? Can't get to a point where they feel comfortable even putting more on his plate. I was expecting him with all the injury at linebacker this summer to get some reps on the first team at some point. And that it just never really popped up. And David in the comments is talking about Lewis Seen. The Bills were kind of toying with the idea of moving him to linebacker. That's somebody that I'd probably call him up before I would think about bringing back Ulofoshio. That just ended up going a completely different direction. That's a guy that I was pretty excited to see from a full package standpoint coming out of Washington.
The one thing I'll say is patience is at an all-time low across the league in terms of development. You really need to show something year after year. There were a few day 2 picks from last year's draft that were let go. Malachi Corley comes to mind with the Jets. A few day 2 picks from a few years ago. If you're not progressing in your development, you don't get to stick around for 2-3 years just because you're a draft pick. And Ulofoshio was a 5th-round pick, was kind of more of a special teams type of player last year. Thought he'd get up to speed a little bit this year, but it was pretty eye-opening, Matt. I believe it was the first preseason game where it was Keontae Jenkins who was getting a lot of run. and he was in well before Ulofoshio even played a snap. And I'll tell you right now, Keontae Jenkins is taking one of those practice squad spots as long as he doesn't get claimed. So that's one less spot for Ulofoshio. Jimmy Charlo is taking one of those practice squad spots as long as he doesn't get claimed. So there's two linebackers. Are the Bills going to go with three linebackers on their practice squad? It's possible. All three of them are young enough where they don't count against the vested veteran number that you have to worry about. But it's also you want to have numbers in other areas too. I think this could be it for Ulofoshio, unfortunately. And it just shows you that if you don't take those leaps from year to year, you're not going to stick around very long with the team that drafted you. Because even if you're a successful franchise, it's all about winning and keeping the best guys around.
Charlo was such a fun story. I actually was pretty blown away by how much he kind of became a part of the conversation. Brian Baldinger did two separate cut-ups of him on social media on X, I believe, where he kind of dove into some of his film from a couple of the preseason games. And, what he did, I don't want to like pass over that too quickly. Like what Charlo accomplished this summer, coming in after training camp had already started. I believe he got there early August, to get thrown out there for a couple practices, playing your first preseason game. Obviously that was highlighted on Hard Knocks, but to continually building on that, getting more comfortable, playing important snaps in that third preseason game and doing well for himself. Like, this is a guy that in Buffalo or elsewhere, I think is open up a lot of eyes. And if the Bills can get him back in kind of a developmental plan, we've seen what they've done with just Joe Andreessen over the last year. This is a team that's found a way to, find talent on the UDFA market. Obviously this wasn't their UDFA, everything that happened with the Jets, but to bring him in reminds me a lot of what they've done with Ryan Vandermark over the last couple of years since they kind of plucked him away from the Indianapolis Colts.
And as ugly as some of the scores have been in the preseason the last few years, Jimmy Charlo is why I love what Sean McDermott and this coaching staff do in the preseason, and that is little to no game planning. If you were to game plan and you have Jimmy Charlo come in, he doesn't know the system. He doesn't know the terminology. He probably struggles a little bit. Instead, go out on the field, keep it simple, keep it vanilla, let players play with their instincts, let them use their natural ability. And you got to see that on special teams with that first tackle in the Giants game, and some of the run that he got in the preseason finale and just playing linebacker and how good he was. So the natural athleticism and the instincts are there. Now on the practice squad, it's going to be about learning the terminology, learning the ins and outs of this defense. And, if the Bills were to elevate a linebacker at some point this year, it wouldn't surprise me on that small sample size if he leapfrogged Keontae Jenkins, although Jenkins had a great summer as well before he suffered an injury late. I think they're in a really good spot with those two young linebackers.
You're a big fan of Keontae Jenkins.
He has good tape. When he was playing over Ulofoshio, I was like, I knew who he was, but like, why? It was a why. Why is this guy getting all this run? And then you watched and you said, oh, okay, I get it now. He's, in terms of actual linebacker play, he was leaps and bounds better than Ulofoshio. Really picked things up quickly, or maybe not picked up things quickly, as I just said, they don't game plan. But again, the athleticism, the instincts, what the Bills look for at that position, they were on full display.
I like it. I like when we find Ryan's guys. Ryan's got guys over the years. Davidson was kind of in that Claypool early on. You were a big Claypool guy.
I'm a Latu guy too. I'm a Latu guy at tight end. There's no path for him, but in terms of the 53, but he's going on that practice squad as long as he clears waivers too. He flashed at times this summer. So I don't know, maybe tight end and linebacker. Those are my two positions that I like the most, I guess. I don't know.
I love it. This is great. I like kind of diving into the mind of a Ryan Talbot and really just getting that all out of there. So that's great stuff. All right, let's get to Codrington next. That was my bold prediction, right? Like that Brandon Codrington didn't do enough this summer, but they went out and got him for a reason last year. He's somebody that I think probably still building that rapport a little bit with a new special teams coach and Chris Tabor. One of the things he said to him late in the summer here was that he's got to trust his speed more as a returner. He said that in the locker room after the game on Saturday. And I think that there's maybe a bit of untapped potential that I think the Bills wanted to see. KJ Hamler as a returner, if you keep Shavers, as I'd kind of projected, which I think was a little bit of an off the wall idea to go 7 wide receivers. The Bills don't typically even get close to that. But the idea was, okay, he can return kicks. He's a guy in the room. You can do multiple things with him. But the truth of the matter is, unless they were going to keep him in an additional role, it didn't make a whole lot of sense because he wasn't going to see the field on offense with all of these guys in front of him, Elijah Moore, Samuel, all of the whole group. So I think Codrington making it is interesting. I don't think the Bills necessarily have to be married to this long term, even though he's making the initial 53. It's okay, let's see how this goes for a couple of weeks, maybe even 6 weeks. And when you get your suspended players back and Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi, you can just move on from Codrington, bring one of those roster spots, use them on one of the suspended guys, and then ask one of these other guys to return punts, whether it be maybe a running back. You can ask like a Ty Johnson to do it. You can maybe ask Khalil Shakir. I don't know. Does Khalil Shakir fall into that bucket for you anymore coming off of the
too important on offense?
Yeah.
Unless you're giving him the Micah Hyde role of punt returner where I don't care how much room you have, you're just doing this every single time. It's just a fair catch 100% of the time. You can't risk it with him. He's too important to this team and roster. So that's the boat I'm in. When it comes to Codrington, I honestly didn't look at cuts across the league in terms of were there any other really good return guys that were let go that maybe have more upside at their actual position, cornerback, safety, whatever it may be. Because if that's the case, maybe this is a very short-term stint on the 53. I'm not trying to write him off. I liked a lot of what he did last year. There's a reason that the PFWA named him as one of their return men of the year, rookie of the year team. He flashed a lot. But there was also a lack of trust, I think that's fair to say, with how he was inactive late in meaningful games last year. The Bills didn't want a loss to come down to a bobbled punt return or a fair catch or something like that. So there were some issues there. Now, Chris Tabor comes in. Maybe it's a completely different relationship in terms of trust. Maybe they are going to give him a long leash this year. But if there's someone where I'm sitting here saying they might not be here for long, he'd probably be on my list.
Thank you so much for watching here on this Tuesday afternoon, evening. I don't know, dude. I'm absolutely shot. We had the cut downs the cuts all day, ran to a baseball practice, published the article, and the thing came out, finished the baseball practice, came home, ate dinner real quick. We're coming on here for the show to get into all this, and we got to get done before Hard Knocks, and we have a couple more big takeaways to get to. I'll be interested to see if the Bills maybe pivot off of Codrington at some point. And I think that relationship with Tabor is something that I'm going to be really interested in watching. Let's get to the injured players. And there's a question in here about what the Bills are going to do when Maxwell Hairston gets back. Obviously with the Trey White injury, him not going on IR to start the season, I think is really big news. Everybody thought that maybe Cedric Van Pran Granger would go on, remain on reserve PUP, which would give the Bills 4 weeks. He gets activated. So he is now on the 53-man roster, ready to go. It's Tylen Grable, who's been dealing with a concussion the last couple of weeks. He goes on IR. He'll miss the first 4 weeks, which, I don't know the severity of that. He was working in practice last week with a red jersey. So getting more involved, I thought was maybe ramping up. So this is an interesting kind of development here as we get to the start of the regular season. But in terms of Hairston, Ryan, I don't even think it should be a safe projection that Hairston will be ready to go by week 5. Like, no. Is that something that you think, okay, you get to week 5, he's activated and he's ready to play? Or is it like, man, I'm sitting here thinking if we get to like the bye and beyond the bye and they're still kind of waiting on activating him, that wouldn't shock me.
I don't think it's just going to be 4 weeks and week 5 he's out there playing. You usually need that ramp up period. You need you need a lot of practice. before the Bills necessarily feel good about that. Now, we don't know where he is in the rehab process. We should feel comfortable enough knowing that the Bills think he's still a few weeks out if you're going to put him on the IR, though, because when this injury occurred, it was started out as it's week to week. We don't know if he'll be ready to go by the start of the season or not. This tells us they don't feel comfortable with that. He's rehabbing. He's working at it. Maybe he's still closer to the finish line than what we think, but I would think that maybe post bye week might be a more, a realistic, or a week after that. You want to play it smart with him. You don't want to rush him back. Obviously, you have big plans for him being a first-round pick. We still don't know about Trey White's overall status. I'll say, obviously, it seems encouraging that he made the initial 53-man roster. But until we know more details, that's going to be something to kind of watch. The Bills, in terms of who they claim tomorrow, too. If there's a cornerback that gets claimed, maybe they are worried about how long it's going to take Trey as well, and they just didn't know if the 4-week was the right path for him.
It's hard because with Hairston, I like the approach of drafting him and giving him every opportunity to win that job. But in the way that the Bills built this room, you almost push yourself into a corner with, if this doesn't work out, whether it be by injury or not being able to win the job or keep the job or whatever it happens, now the plan B, like plan B, C, D, E, and F, all of them leave you with very little like confidence. Even Trey, with the way that he was playing early in the summer, like projecting that to the regular season and the Ravens and some of the other teams that are on the Bills schedule, I think the Bills are in a really rough spot. I think you can make an argument that CB2 is equally as concerning as safety 2. And I know some people are even super concerned about safety 1 because of Taylor Rapp's injury history.
I think it's more concerning than safety 1 or 2. I think it's a glaring hole. I think it's an issue where you're going to see opposing teams target whoever is starting there week in, week out until they can prove themselves. Because on one side, you have Christian Benford, and Benford is as locked down as they come. That doesn't mean he won't get a few passes thrown his way, but if you're a team that's going to be passing a lot against the Bills, you're looking in the other direction and saying, okay, let's target this Ingram kid. Let's see if he can make a play or if we can draw a penalty on him, if our guys can get open. And I'm using Ingram just because he seems like the logical first man up to get that crack at it based on their roster over Dorian Strong. But even if Trey White's back soon, he was having a little bit of a rough go of it in the preseason. Now, maybe that was just because it was the preseason. He wasn't going to go all out in terms of the tackling and things like that, but there's questions to be answered there. And if the Bills do go through a rough patch at all this season, I think it's going to be because of teams' ability to throw on them.
Couple questions in here we'll hit before we get out of here. Sad Truth on YouTube asks, was there anybody that was a surprise cut for you? And it's tough because like, not really. And the one that I would probably say is Kendrick Green. Only
That's what I was going to say.
Versatility on the inside. But once they activated Cedric Van Pran Granger, it almost made complete sense why they would move on from Green and maybe try to bring him back to the practice squad. And listen, when the Bills signed him, I don't think there was a huge market for him either. I think he's in the same bucket as Dane Jackson. So getting him back on the practice squad is definitely a possibility. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, that was exactly my player because the Bills in Sean McDermott's history have never removed someone from the PUP list this late in the year. It's always been by like mid-August, or else they started the year on the reserve PUP list. This is an outlier. It's never happened that way before. So I was banking on Van Pran Granger starting the year, missing 4 weeks, Green with the interior versatility, taking that spot. So when they said he was waived, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then sure enough, a few hours later, minutes later, whatever it was, we've activated Van Pran Granger, and then it made a little bit more sense. Derek Forrest, to some, might have been a surprise. He just never climbed up the depth chart there. I liked some of the tape from him in Washington in 2022. but injuries over the last few years. Couldn't get on the field with a new coaching regime last year. All that factors into why he was available, why the Bills were able to sign him at such a low number. I think it was a ridiculously low 1-year deal the Bills were able to get for him. So they didn't lose a lot of money. It was kind of just let's see what he can do. He never got past Hamlin. He never got past Cam Lewis. Jordan Hancock obviously jumped him as well. So when you look at that pecking order, there was just no spot for him.
I'm not overly surprised about Derek Forrest. I think even as high up as both of us were on the addition, it was never somebody that I thought was going to come in here and could he have competed for the job, which I think we spoke about when the Bills signed him. Sure. I thought if he had the kind of summer that would force his way into the conversation, I think in a lot of ways, the way that Jordan Hancock kind of did before he got injured. Sure. I think we left the door open to that, but I was never expecting him to come in here. And I always thought it was going to be a Cole Bishop opportunity opposite Taylor Rapp to start the season. And obviously the injury was a little bit of a setback, but I think as we get into this thing, I think they want to see what Bishop has. And I almost think like keeping a veteran around like that. I'm not saying that he had the kind of summer that would warrant this kind of fear. He's not that player, but I more want to say I'm not surprised that they didn't bring in a veteran because of what that could have meant for Cole Bishop, if that makes any sense.
No, it does, because of the confidence and the fact that maybe you'd feel more comfortable with a veteran if they had some kind of knowledge of your system. Bishop is a player that the Bills drafted in the second round. They want him on the field. This is his opportunity. And we just talked about 20 minutes ago about short leashes in this league. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get cut next year or anything like that, but this year is his audition to prove that he is capable of starting and being an answer for this defense. Because if he's not, Taylor Rapp, obviously, who knows if he'll come back again or if he'll be part of the long term here either. But you do have Jordan Hancock, who athleticism flashed in the preseason. You have another draft next year. You have free agency next year. This is his runway. Take the ball, run with it. But if he does, flop, if there's injuries, if he doesn't play to a high level, this could be a one and done in terms of him being, I don't want to say handed a starting job, but the Bills did everything possible to give him a starting job this summer.
We have a great question here in the comments. I think for a while I had it in our description on the show. What is the intro song for the Spotify podcast? That was actually made by our buddies over at the Rockpile Report years ago when we started the podcast. I don't have the song title and band in front of me, but I will get that and I will post it in the description with a link to their Spotify so people can find the song and their album and everything like that. I don't think they're still making music anymore. If the last time I talked to Chris, that's what he told me, but it is an awesome song. It's been our intro since almost the beginning of the show. Yeah. So shout out to the Rockpile guys. We really appreciate them doing that for us. So I think that's going to do it. We got to get off here and go watch the next episode installment of Hard Knocks. We'll be back tomorrow. Brandon Beans talks at 2:30. We will pod at some point after that. And then it'll be the long weekend before we get to week 1 for Ryan Talbot. I'm Matt Parrino. See you then, everybody.